At just after 2 in the morning, 19-year-old Audrey leaves a busy hotel on the central coast of Australia. She'd been out with friends, nothing unusual about that. She steps out onto the main road, and for a moment, everything about this night still feels normal. The street lights are on, and cars drive past. But within the next hour, things change, and really not in a good way. Somewhere along that road, Audrey's phone goes quiet, and then she is never heard from again. And by the following afternoon, Audrey would be found in water, just a short distance from where she was last seen. At first, it would all be described as an accident, a misadventure, but that explanation doesn't hold out for long, because behind that same stretch of road, there is another parallel timeline unfolding, a separate series of events happening unknown to Audrey, involving someone who should never have even been there. This one gets out of hand. Let's dive in. Audrey Griffin was 19 years old. She lived on the central coast of New South Wales, Australia. Her life was really structured. She was moving in a very clear and positive direction. She was a triathlete. She played rugby and competed in water polo. She'd represented her school at a high level and had been named vice captain at Central Coast Sports College. Training sessions, competitions, proper recovery. Audrey was the real deal. Shortly before March of 2025, the events that this video is about, she travelled to New Zealand to compete in the Antco Foods Half Ironman. That alone required months of preparation, swimming, cycling and running. Each part demanded its own level of endurance and skill, each part making me realise I need to go to the gym. And outside of sports, Audrey had already made plans for what would come next. She intended to join the Australian Navy. That decision added another layer of structure that really seemed to suit her. Entry requirements, training expectations, a defined pathway forwards and upwards. Earlier on in the day of March the 22nd, Audrey had spent time with family. It was a good, normal day. And then later that evening, she went out with friends to the Gosford Hotel, a fun and familiar place. She remained there until around 2 a.m. At that point, it was time to leave. And from that moment forward, every decision that was made would depend on what was immediately available. Remember, it was 2 a.m. It was all about transport, timing, and who was nearby. She attempted to arrange a ride home, an Uber or a taxi, but none were available. So instead of waiting indefinitely, she made a decision. She would walk home to a friend's house. That route would take her along the entrance road, moving towards the arena area. As she walked, she remained in contact with a friend. She was sending Snapchat videos, only short updates, but it was proof that she was okay. These messages would later become much more important, because at this stage, we are still in kind of that before world where everything is good. But soon, a whole new, darker afterworld was about to be unleashed. Whilst Audrey's life was following structure and routine, there was another pattern forming elsewhere, a pattern that had already been established long before that night. Someone else had prior convictions for DV, assault, intimidation, fraud and theft. And these weren't just isolated offences, it was literally who this guy was. His behaviour even led him to prison time in 2020. After his release, that pattern continued through further charges, through breaches of apprehended violence orders, which is related to the DV, and so restrictions had been placed on his behaviour, legal boundaries had been set, but those boundaries had already been crossed before. In January of 2025, just 2 months before the events of this video, the same man was sentenced once again, but this time he was not returned to prison. Instead, he was given a community corrections order, and that decision would allow him to just remain in the community. At the same time though, he was already facing 11 separate DV charges. So the system had identified risk, which is good. It had documented behaviour, But it had not removed him from public spaces or public life, which is bad. And within this same period, there was also another layer to this whole thing. A woman that the man had previously been in a relationship with. And it would be on the night of March the 22nd into March the 23rd, while Audrey was out with friends, that the man was once again making contact with the woman that he'd been in a relationship with. He did this over and over through calls and voicemails, the contents of which were clearly threatening. He was making direct statements indicating that he intended to end her. So these two separate timelines on the same night were happening in parallel. One person was moving through a normal night out, but another's behaviour was escalating in a way that had been seen before. At this stage, these two paths have not crossed yet, but they are moving towards the same location, and the timing begins to overlap. So, after 2 a.m, Audrey leaves a Gosford hotel. She goes from a crowded indoor space to an open road. And remember, she couldn't get a taxi or an Uber, so she begins just walking home to her friends. She continues walking, continues sending Snapchat updates to a friend, and this confirms that at that time she's still in control, she's still safe. As she continues walking, her last known location was near Arena, close to Punt Bridge. This is a stretch of road that runs alongside water. And then, at around the same time, another data point appears. At approximately 2:43 a.m, a mobile phone is detected in that same area. It is only location data, but it does place someone nearby to Audrey. So now, both timelines are occupying the same stretch of road, the same physical space, and the same point in time. At around 3 a.m, a nearby resident hears something. It is a high-pitched scream, one single moment that stands out enough to be remembered. At the time though, it was not immediately connected to anything sinister. Emergency services were not called, so the moment just passes. And then, the area just falls back into silence. From this point forward, there is a noticeable gap. No confirmed movement from Audrey, no further communications, no witnesses who can describe what happened next. The next real point in the timeline is when Audrey does not arrive at her destination. She does not respond to any messages. In fact, she's never seen again. By the time morning arrived, the concern had shifted into something far more serious. Audrey had all but vanished. Her mother checked her phone location, something she had done before. But this time the result is different. It's strange. The location is not moving. It just shows a single point in Arena Creek. That alone is enough to raise alarm bells. Because, even in the best case scenario, it would mean that Audrey's phone had been dropped or thrown into the water. As the day continues, efforts move from just waiting to searching. Friends travelled towards a location that the phone was pinging from. They were looking for anything that could explain what had happened. And then, in the afternoon of March the 23rd, the timeline resumes in the worst possible way. A body is found partially submerged in water, close to the road, close to where Audrey's phone location had indicated. The body was fully clothed. There are no immediate signs of exactly what has happened. No obvious scene that points towards a specific cause. Police attend and a crime scene is established. The body is examined, a post-mortem is conducted, and initial findings indicate just drowning. There is no immediate evidence of anyone else being involved at all, and based on that, the conclusion is reached pretty quickly. After the body is identified by Audrey's own mother, her passing is classified as non-suspicious, a case of misadventure, an accident, a tragic fall into water. And that classification is pretty powerful, because it determines the direction of resources by police. It sets the level of urgency or non-urgency, and it dictates the type of evidence actively being pursued. Once that label is applied, the case begins to move towards closure. However, not everyone thinks that this is now over. When Audrey's parents view her in the morgue, they notice some details that they don't believe fit. There is mud under her fingernails, and it wasn't just a little bit. They described it as being packed in. That detail suggests something different to the family, because it implied resistance, like Audrey had perhaps been grabbing or clawing at the ground. From their perspective, this was not an accident. They did not accept the professional conclusion. So instead of accepting and stepping back, instead they begin pushing forwards. Pushing forwards just like Audrey had done in life. They ask questions, they request information, they return to the location. In a moment that is pretty unbelievable, the phone that originally led to the discovery of Audrey, which up to this point had been missing, it is located by a friend near the creek, days after the body had been found. This was another piece of evidence not initially recovered by investigators. At the same time, her mother begins asking about CCTV, footage from the area, from nearby roads, from the hotel, anything that shows movements after she left. These requests are repeated, because from their perspective there is still a missing piece, something that explains how a trained athlete, someone comfortable in water, remember the triathlons, ends up in a creek without a clear cause. As this continues though, the case remains in its original classification, that being not suspicious. But the pressure begins to build, because each unanswered question points back to the same issue. The timeline is incomplete, and the answers just aren't there. As the days pass, the direction of the investigation slowly begins to change. And this isn't because of a new discovery at the scene, it's because of something that was already there but had not been fully examined. That being CCTV footage. Footage that had been there since the beginning, but it had not been central to the initial conclusion. When that footage is reviewed more closely, it shows something that has not been accounted for. Yes, it showed Audrey walking along the road, but it also showed, behind her, a man. They were not interacting. He didn't seem to be approaching her, but he was there, and he was moving in the same direction and maintaining a safe distance. Now that alone, it doesn't confirm anything, but it does introduce a possibility that had not been considered. The possibility that Audrey may not have been alone. At that point, police release an image of the man. A still frame is taken from the footage. He's described as wearing a white cap, grey shorts, a red top and carrying a bag. The public is asked for information, for help to identify the man. But even then, he's not initially described as a suspect. Just someone who may have been in the area, a potential witness. So Audrey's case begins to reopen but cautiously. Now identifying the man becomes the next critical step. And that image from the CCTV reaches someone who recognizes him immediately, a woman who knew him. She sees the clothing, the build, the face, and she knows who it is. Adrian Noel Torrance, age 53, her former partner, the same man who, on the night Audrey disappeared, had been calling her repeatedly, leaving messages, making threats. And this, of course, changes everything. The two threads of the story are now deeply entwined. Now there is overlap, and not just in location, but also in possible behaviour. There was a man making threats within the same window of time that a young woman disappears in the same area. So Adrian's ex-partner reports this to the police. In doing this, she explains the phone calls and explains the terrible history she had with him. At this point, the investigation shifts. It goes from uncertainty, from even just being an accident, to now having a focused line of inquiry. The man in the footage is no longer just a presence. He could now become central to understanding what had happened. And now, for perhaps the first time in this case, there is a clear direction. We know who he was, where he was, and what else he'd been doing that night. Once Adrian Torrance is identified, all the parts of the investigation begin to align. What had previously been just separate fragments now start to form a real sequence. Adrian's location is confirmed through phone data, and at approximately 2:43 a.m. on that early morning, it was his device that was detected in the same area that Audrey was last known to be at. So we know he was there and at the right time. The available CCTV footage also shows direction of movement. Both individuals, Adrian and Audrey, on the same route. One ahead, one behind. Then there is the forensic evidence. Material recovered from under Audrey's fingernails is tested. The results indicate DNA consistent with Torrance. That detail is a real breakthrough. It confirms contact. It confirms proximity beyond what could be called coincidence, and it supports the theory that there was physical interaction. From there, investigators dig a little bit deeper into Adrian. Phone surveillance is conducted, his conversations are monitored, and during one of those calls, police allege that he makes statements that amount to a confession. At that point, the threshold for action is met. On April 21st, 2025, Adrian Noel Torrens is arrested. He is charged with murder. Alongside that, the 11 unrelated DV charges remain active. Bail is refused, and he is taken into custody. For the first time in this case, there is a clear resolution point forming, a suspect identified, evidence established, a charge made. All eyes now look towards legal proceedings in court. There would be a full account, a structured examination of events, answers delivered through a strict legal process. But that process would never happen. Just days after his arrest, while being held at the Silverwater Correctional Complex, Adrian Torrens is found unresponsive in his cell. Emergency services attempt to revive him, but they are unsuccessful. This event is later reported as not being treated as suspicious. Indications are this was by his own hand. This frustrating outcome changes the case once again, because without a trial there's no formal presentation of evidence in court. There will be no cross-examinations, no full reconstruction delivered step by step within a legal framework. Instead, the process has to move to a different setting, a coronial inquest. This will be focused not on prosecution, but on trying to establish the facts, trying to understand exactly what happened, and examining whether anything could have been prevented. It's difficult to say exactly what happened on that night, but it's believed that a physical altercation did occur. However, there was no witnesses to the moment. There was evidence, however, that suggested resistance on Audrey's part. She did fight back. Remember, she was physically fit, she was strong, she was determined, and she would not give in easily. Adrian, however, eventually struck her hard enough that she was rendered unconscious. From there, the sequence of events becomes even less certain, but the result is starkly clear. Audrey ended up in water. We don't know if she fell, if she was placed, or if she was held there. Either way, the outcome was the same. Her time came to an end. New South Wales Police later acknowledge that the case could have been handled better, that decisions made early on in the case affected the directions of the investigation. For Audrey's family, I imagine that brings no comfort whatsoever. Just a terrible case and a terrible waste. In the early morning hours, two figures leave a house on a quiet street in Prestatyn, Wales, UK. There is no one else around, but there are cameras watching their every move. One person walks ahead, and the second, needing to use a crutch to walk, follows a few steps behind. If you saw this in real time, you probably wouldn't stop, because outside of the early hour, it was all pretty normal. Apart from, that is, one detail that will haunt you as you lay down to sleep tonight. The person walking behind is wearing a balaclava at 3:19 AM on a residential street. There's no visible struggle between the two of them, by the way, just an odd couple taking a very early morning walk. I guess so far we could convince ourselves that this was totally normal, but only one of these people would ever make it home again. So the question is, what happened on that walk? What led to a moment of madness? And which one of them made it home? In this video, I will share with you real CCTV of the incident, body cam footage of the arrest, horrifying crime scene photos, disturbing Discord messages from the perpetrator, and 5 facts that really make me question humanity. Let's dive in. To really get what happened on that walk, we have to go back quite a long way, because by the time they stepped outside, an ordeal had already been going on for several hours. Inside the house on Coniston Drive, Angela Shellis, 45 years old, was in her bedroom. She was already dealing with a knee injury at the time, and she was relying on a crutch to move around. So she was physically pretty vulnerable. It was around 11 PM when this situation began to unfold. A man entered her room, taking her by surprise. and he then subjected her to a torturous attack. And this situation, it didn't last just minutes. It lasted for approximately 4 hours. Just think about that for a second. 4 hours, half a working day. It's almost unthinkable. This was not a case of a brief loss of control. This was a sustained period of time, a period where Angela was trapped inside one room. To make matters worse, a hammer was involved. Like an actual nightmare was unfolding here. Angela was prevented from leaving. Pressure was applied to her neck and then released. She asked for help, begged for help more than once. She asked for emergency services to be called. But of course, that did not happen. To make things somehow even darker, the whole thing was being recorded. At some point during those hours, the perpetrator began using a dictaphone. He recorded parts of the night as it unfolded. He was capturing his handiwork in real time. On that recording, Angela can be heard asking for help. But just to give you an idea of how harrowing those recordings are, they've been described as being too distressing to even be played in court during the later trial. It's worth pointing out something important about the timeline that was unfolding in that room, because understanding the timeline makes everything worse. There were multiple points during those 4 hours where this could have stopped, where a different decision could have been made, but it wasn't, and instead, just after 3 a.m., the night or early morning as it now was, changed direction. The perpetrator told Angela that they were going to leave the house. The explanation was simple and cruel. The story was that they were going to get help, medical help for Angela, the same thing that she'd been asking for hours. So at that point, she agreed to go. Anything outside of being held captive in her room probably seemed like a positive. But before the two of them stepped outside, there was another disturbing escalation. Angela herself, the victim, was made to wear a balaclava. There is no practical reason given for this, but it's definitely disturbing. Perhaps the perpetrator couldn't bear to look at Angela anymore. What this did mean though is when they left the house, Angela's identity was hidden. At 3:19 a.m, CCTV captured the two of them walking out together, with Angela following closely behind. And at this point still, it all could have been resolved, and everyone could have returned to a normal life. But instead, they walked out into the early hours, and then, well, let's find out. Now, about that dictaphone recording, it shows that this whole thing was not unfolding spontaneously, as well as recording Angela begging for help. The perpetrator had also recorded himself speaking before the incident. In those recordings, he talked about what he intended to do. So now, evidentially, we have 2 points in time. We have the before and the during, both documented in horrifying detail. There's something different about the dictaphone evidence to what we normally see. In this instant, it captures the move from intent to action in pretty much real time. This means that there's very little left to interpret here. By the time they left the house, we know that there was a plan, and that it was now in motion. Cameras picked up part of the route, and yes, there were parts of the journey missing, but there was enough to establish a real picture of what was going on. At one point, both figures approached a railway crossing, and they simply crossed it without stopping. This makes it seem like they knew exactly where they were going. I mean, I wouldn't cross railway lines in the dark, unless I knew the area and the timings well. It's worth noting that the perpetrator was carrying a rucksack, and inside it was the same hammer that had already been used earlier on in the night. And the fact that he has this hammer changes how I look at this walk. Far from going out in search of help, it was simply a continuation of what had already been happening. And the fact that the hammer was there with them on this journey, that is a foreboding fact. So Angela followed behind the man, the bag, the hammer, still wearing the balaclava. There were no visible attempts to get attention, and remember, Angela believed that she was going to get help for herself. It was also early enough that most people were still asleep, and late enough that the streets were empty. So really, there was nobody to help. Eventually, the route led towards Morpher Nature Reserve, an open space, dark and quiet. And at that time of the morning, it was almost completely, and I mean totally, isolated. Their walk ended at a bench inside the reserve. There, Angela was told to sit down. The man's control continued right up to the final moment. He then removed that hammer from his bag, and blows then rained down, over and over again. These blunt strikes would end Angela's time on this earth. This act alone seems almost unfathomable to us, hopefully, but to the man, he was still not finished. After the attack, Angela's body was moved. It was dragged away from the bench into an area of undergrowth near a footpath. This is an aerial picture that shows the route and the marks left behind. The trail is over 100 meters long, marked in Angela's red DNA. The man then left the scene and returned back to Angela's house. CCTV captured him arriving back at around 5:35 a.m. But this was not the end of his movements. At approximately 6:25 a.m., the man then went back to the nature reserve. This time though, he was believed to be carrying some cleaning materials. But by now, something big had changed. The once isolated and deserted path was no longer empty. People had started to arrive, dog walkers, early morning runners, and this fact means that the man was interrupted, and the next steps of his plan were stopped before they started. His planned cleanup did not and could not happen. The 100-meter-long red trail remained. The crime scene was therefore left intact. And that changes pretty much everything going forwards, because instead of a cleaned-up crime scene, police would later arrive at a scene that still held the original evidence in its original state. So, whoever the perpetrator was, it seems like they were in big trouble. Well, so far we've covered everything that happened in the physical world. There was another version of this case unfolding at the same time. I'm talking about online. It's that darned digital footprint. Before anything happened inside Angela's house at night, Tristan Roberts was already active on Discord, and he was active across multiple accounts. When I say multiple, I mean multiple. There were around 16 in total. Some of his accounts were banned, but when he was banned, he would just open a new account anyway. This whole banning thing matters too, because I don't think it's easy to get banned from Discord, so Tristan must have been saying some pretty egregious things. The repeated bans also show that he was continuing to say the same bad things over and over, so we can guess that he wasn't getting better in his mindset, and instead he was going further off the deep end. I actually have some of the things that he said on Discord. Here's one. But yeah, I do hate girls. Are you okay with that? Girls/women, I also don't trust them. On its own, that's not a crime, but it is a starting point for how he felt. Because from there, his opinions seem to become more focused, more specific, and more personal. Then comes this. I like him, haha, Dexter, he's like me. But I wanted peace, you know, and I'll end anyone who tries to take it from me. Now that's not just simply frustration. That's someone openly identifying himself with a fictional character that is just known, defined by his violence. And Tristan is voluntarily placing himself in that role. At the same time, there are references to weapons. He says, it's really good quality. I could chop a bear apart with this. It's gonna be like some American Psycho, bleep, ha ha. Still, you arguably could miss it, just. People do say extreme things online all the time. But here's the problem. This escalates more and more until he says something truly disturbing like, to be honest with you, I nearly traumatized myself today by putting my shoes on at like midnight when she was sleeping and having the hammer in my hand. So now he is already saying something that really relates to what we have already learnt in this video. And then his language moves on again from consideration to seeming certainty. Don't worry, she is gonna just vanish off the earth. I already tried everything else. Now it's time. And alongside these messages, there were also searches made on his devices, allegedly using an AI chatbot, where he was looking for methods, ways to cause harm, ways to avoid detection in his crimes. So by the time the actions of the night began, there was already a damning and terrifying digital footprint in place. However, Tristan finds a way to keep on getting worse. After returning to Angela's house, after her time on this earth had come to a close, after everything had happened at the reserve, Tristan went back online and posted again. So you can see how I feel after killing her, right? That is pretty close to an admission, documented and timestamped. And at the same time, he really does keep getting lower. He now uses Angela's phone, and he messages her son Ethan pretending to be her, sending just normal messages with no indication that anything was wrong. This action creates an important delay. Ethan, of course, assumed that his mother was still alive to send the messages. But this only worked for a while because eventually, reality does catch up with the message. And when it does, the ties between what was said online and what actually happened in real life, they become impossible to ignore. So let's take a step back and see what we already have lining up. We have that digital evidence. It is a timeline. It shows hostility towards women. It shows identification of a victim, its preparation, its intent. And then there's even confirmation after the act. As digital footprints go, they don't get much more tied up in a bow than this one. However, there is one more truly disturbing twist in this story that makes this whole thing so much worse. On the morning of October the 24th, the crime scene had now changed. The nature reserve was no longer quiet. It was now fully active, even more busy than normal. This is because a member of the public going for a walk saw something in the undergrowth. It was Angela, motionless and cold. Emergency services were called and police arrived and secured the scene. Almost immediately, there were indicators that this was not an accident. They noticed the blaringly obvious 100-meter trail of red DNA. It led from the bench to where Angela had been left. There was also evidence scattered around. It all showed where the incident had begun and also where it ended, where Angela was. Nearby, several items were recovered: a crutch, gloves, and a balaclava that matched what Angela had been made to wear when leaving her house. At that moment, though, there was still a problem. The victim had not yet been identified. Remember, at this time, not even son Ethan knew that his mother was no longer with us. There was no immediate confirmation of who Angela was. She was just an unnamed victim. And initially that slowed everything down because without identification, there is no true starting point. But at the same time, running alongside, something else was already happening. Away from the scene in the nature reserve, Angela's family had started raising concerns. Angela had not returned home, and that was not normal. When loved ones spoke to the police, one detail was mentioned. At the time, Angela still needed to use a crutch to walk. That detail travelled back to the scene, and it matched up to what had been found. So those two separate threads, the troves of physical evidence and the family's concern, they all meet up at one point, and that is Angela Shellis. Once that identification was confirmed, the investigation shifted immediately, because now there was another location connected to her, that being her home, and the people inside it. Later that same day at approximately 1:20 p.m, police attended the address on Coniston Drive. There, Tristan Roberts was arrested. The focus was no longer on who had done this, but on how to connect all the dots. And you see, there's one more thing. Tristan Roberts was the 18-year-old son of Angela Shellis. He had done all of this to his mum.
And face the wall. Yes, please, drop the bottle. Okay, so...
I'm just going to put you in handcuffs for now, okay?
Okay.
Have you got anything on you?
No. I just turned over after.
You okay?
Yeah.
No more details of the body and things.
Yeah, all in order at the moment. Tristan came to the door and he came out. So we'll wait for other officers to get here before we go into the address.
After his arrest, Tristan Roberts was interviewed over a period of 4 days. There were 9 separate interviews. Each one was an opportunity to respond to the evidence. But each time, the answer was the same.
That plastic bag that you've just seen in those photographs, is that the same is that the same plastic bag that you took out with you on the early hours of Friday the 24th of October?
No comment.
When we've just seen you in that CCTV footage?
No comment.
No comment, no comment, no comment. Now, on its own, that might not seem unusual. It is a legal right in the UK, and I think most solicitors will just tell you to say it. But in this case, it creates a contrast, because while nothing was being said in that interview room, plenty of evidence was already speaking for him. CCTV had placed him leaving the house at 3:19 a.m. and then returning alone at 5:35 a.m. The timings had been established. The dictaphone had recorded parts of the night in real time. These included Mother Angela asking for help. There were the online messages that had documented intents before the incident, and it also referenced what he had done afterwards. Items recovered from the scene matched what had been carried away from the house, and forensic evidence linked those items back to Angela. The case did not depend on what Tristan said. It could be built on what was left behind, and by the time the interviews were complete, the foundations of the case were already solidly in place. Long before the night of October the 23rd, there had been signs that something was wrong, and they weren't subtle signs either. They weren't things that only make sense in hindsight. There were clear concerns that were being raised by people close to the situation. Angela had even written notes expressing fear for her safety, and one of these notes is particularly interesting because it matches up to the Discord message that Tristan sent when he said he got up and put his shoes on and was holding the hammer. That night, Angela wrote, "Oh my God, I did not sleep well at all, and Tristan kept coming into my room too. Why? Am I safe in my room tonight?" She was already extremely concerned about what might happen inside her home. At the same time, family members had recognised changes in Tristan's behaviour. There was escalation and aggression. They were also aware that he had bought a sharp implement and the hammer that was eventually used. Overall, there was a pattern that was becoming harder to manage. And in fact, this did not go unaddressed. Angela had reached out for help. She had contacted services. She had tried to find a way to stabilise the situation. So really, this is the key point. The risk had been identified. Angela was clearly worried, scared even of her own son. This wasn't one of those situations where warning signs only become clear after the fact. They were already there, already recognised, already documented. But by the night of October the 23rd, nothing had really changed and no help had been received. So I guess this offers a difficult question. At what point does a situation move beyond concern or fears and into something that requires immediate intervention? Because in this case, that point had already been reached clearly. And I mean, that's an understatement. Tristan Roberts was charged with murder on October the 28th, 2025. Over the following months, the timeline that had been built from the evidence, from the recorded movements and the digital records was now being examined in detail. The legal process trundled on until the 5th of February 2026. At this point, Tristan entered a guilty plea. This means that Angela's loved ones would not be subjected to a full trial. Sentencing took place on the 25th of March 2026 at Mould Crown Court. There, the focus shifted from interpreting just how bad what happened was to the level of planning involved, the duration of the incident inside the house, the recording of the incident seemingly for prosperity, and the vulnerability of Angela due to her injury. Each of these elements mattered, and together they painted a dark, dark picture. The defence raised mental health as a factor in the case. Tristan did have ADHD and autism, and both of those were considered. But the conclusion was clear. Tristan understood his actions. Tristan had control over his actions. And the judge described the case in summary as involving significant premeditation. This wasn't something that began and ended in a single moment. It was something that developed and continued to grow until it exploded in this way. The judge told the court this was a planned and sustained attack, and the court found that what happened was not brief. The judge said that this was a prolonged and deeply distressing period of violence. When it came to sentencing, the court considered not just what happened, but for how long it continued, and how many chances there were to stop it. The judge made that one final point very clearly, saying, "You had multiple opportunities to stop, but at no point did you." Based on that, the sentence was delivered: life imprisonment. Tristan received life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 22 years and 6 months.
Love you, miss you so much. Have fun with your daddy.
How to make it better.
Don't put that on the camera.
Does he live alone?
He lives with his 16-year-old daughter who is not answering the phone.
This case has more twists than, I don't know, a very twisty thing. Here we go. Before we can even begin to understand this one, it's important to try and establish who Daniel Wendell Halseth actually was. Daniel was born on January the 28th, 1976, in Estacada, Oregon, USA. He grew up in the area and then later graduated from Hood River Valley High School before continuing his education at Western Oregon State University, and there he earned a Bachelor of Music. He would later complete a master's degree in business at Corban University. Music, though, remained a big part of his life. He played both drums and piano, and according to those who knew him, if there was an instrument in a room, he would gravitate towards it. All of this led to the nickname Drummer Dan. As well as his creative side, Daniel worked professionally in IT, and he was described as a consultant and a facilitator. He worked on various projects that required him to move between locations. And so, at different points in his life, he lived outside Nevada. This included time spent in Texas, before eventually returning to Las Vegas. Daniel also loved spending time outdoors. He walked frequently, often taking photographs and recording videos. He actually has quite an extensive social media presence, including YouTube. There's a recurring detail in multiple counts about Daniel. People say that he would pause regularly. He would take in his surroundings. He would document what he saw, and he would just appreciate the moment. He lived by a phrase that appears repeatedly in descriptions of him, and that is, always stop and smell the roses. That phrase provides some insight into how he approached his daily life, at least from what people have said about him. He was also described as someone who supported others, including volunteering his time to help returning veterans. But above all of this, Daniel was a father. He had children, and they were central to his life. Everything about this version of Daniel's life, from the people that he loved, they do not even begin to explain what was later discovered inside his house.
I just want to put a super quick pause on this documentary to say one thing. At the start of April, I said that I wanted to hit 250 channel members. It seemed like a lofty goal. It was kind of doubling the number of members that I had at the start of the month. And thank you all so much. It's incredible. I just hit 252 channel members. And seriously, just thank you so much. So what I want to do now is to set my next target, which is 300 channel members. And I'm going to set that target for the end of May. I know we're not in May yet, but I feel like it's a big number, so I want to give myself a bit more time, so I'm not disappointed. But yeah, thank you so much to all channel members. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. If you're not a channel member and you're here, then being a part of the Dark Case family just means the world to me anyway. Like, thank you so much. Thank you. But I've talked enough. Let's get on with the video. Thank you. Bye.
The music, the walks, the charity work, that was all only part of a much more complicated situation. He had been previously married to Elizabeth Halseth, and during that time, Elizabeth built a public profile in Nevada, eventually serving as a state senator. From the outside, they appeared to be functioning as a proper family, raising children whilst managing both private life and public responsibilities. But that image didn't last. In 2011, a serious incident took place inside the household. Daniel was arrested following allegations made by Elizabeth. Those allegations stated that he had physically assaulted her, and that he had also made threats of an intimate nature. And I know that intimate isn't the right word when something's non-consensual, but I'm just having to play by the rules here. According to reports at the time, the claims included that he had struck her, and that he had made statements suggesting that he would disgustingly violate her. These details entered the public record as part of his arrest. However, it's very important to state that this case did not proceed to a conviction. The charges were later dismissed. So there was no final legal ruling to establish if the allegations were proven or not. So the allegations exist. It seems that they must have been serious enough to lead to Daniel's arrest, but they were not tested through a full trial, and no conviction followed. So that leaves this whole incident pretty unresolved. It does remain part of the documented history of their relationship, but there's no definitive legal conclusion. What is clear though is that the relationship did not recover from its problems. Daniel and Elizabeth divorced, having 3 children. Following their separation, custody arrangements were put in place for their children, and for a period of time those arrangements seemed to just work. But the earlier incident did not simply disappear for the family, even though it kind of did legally. It always remained in the background of the family dynamic. And over time, those underlying tensions began to resurface, because nearly a whole decade later, the structure that had been in place started to move once again. And in 2020, one of their daughters, named Sierra, she started spending more time with Daniel once again. And in doing so, this would bring past issues back into focus. When Sierra started spending time with Father Daniel once again, this wasn't an informal arrangement. It really couldn't be that simple anymore. Instead, it had to be legally defined. During one of Sierra's visits to Father Daniel, she just stayed with him rather than returning home to her mother, Elizabeth. This decision led to immediate legal action. A court order was then issued requiring Sierra to return. This is another important moment in the timeline too, because the situation had moved beyond just a family disagreement and back into formal legal territory. Sierra did not just return voluntarily, at least not in first. Instead, communication continued between family members and legal representatives. During this time, emails were exchanged, and they outlined where everyone stood on both sides. There were now disagreements over where Sierra should live. There were also concerns raised over her well-being. And then, of course, there were competing narratives about what was actually in her best interest. Eventually, though, Sierra was required to comply with the court order. She returned to her mother, but the situation didn't just settle down. Instead, it began to escalate once again. Sierra later provided statements that outlined her perspective on both living arrangements and family dynamics. These statements included claims about her experiences and her reasons for wanting to remain with her father, and we'll talk some more about this later on. At the same time, other family members, including Sierra's siblings, provided their own accounts, but these did not always align. It's difficult to paint one clear picture here because there is no single unified version of events. Instead, there are multiple people, and all of them are presenting their own interpretation of the same situation. And in complex family situations like this, everyone has their own truth, although I don't really like that phrase. I think it actually works here, so I'll just put it that way. What is consistent though, from everyone's point of view, is that the family dynamic had clearly become unstable, because now once again there were legal interventions, there were those written statements, and there were ongoing disputes about control, safety and responsibility. The reason why I've really tried to drill into this is because I'm trying to set the scene here. And as always, these things don't happen in a vacuum, so it's important to hear and try and understand. To add a whole other layer to this thing, during the same time that we've been discussing, daughter Sierra, now aged 16, was in a relationship. The boyfriend was an 18-year-old named Aaron Guerrero. The relationship developed and had been going on for a few months, and it seems like it was serious. And from the available information, it was not viewed as a minor or casual connection. It was serious enough that it began to influence a lot of different things for Sierra. At some point, plans were discussed between Sierra and Aaron about leaving. And this wasn't framed as a short trip or a vacation. They were talking about moving away for good. As we know, Sierra's home life was pretty bad. There was a lot going on there, and to me this sounds like an attempt to just remove herself entirely from that environment. Father Daniel became aware of the relationship, and he also became aware of the plans to run away. So, as a parent really should do, Daniel intervened and he restricted contact between Sierra and Aaron. He was serious about this too. He limited their communications, and the relationship was now no longer permitted to continue as freely as it had been. So now, on top of everything else within this family, there was yet another conflict here. On one side, a parent attempting to control the situation, and on the other side, a teenager attempting to maintain a relationship and independence, constantly trying to pull away. But no matter what Daniel tried to enforce, the relationship did not end, and the runaway plans did not just disappear. Instead, they carried on, but they were perhaps forced to now continue in a more covert way. More private, more deliberate. By the time April the 9th, 2021 arrives, something inside Daniel Halseth's home had already gone very wrong. The only thing is, nobody outside of the property was aware of it yet. However, concerns and suspicions were growing. Daniel's mother became uneasy after communications with him didn't match his usual behaviour, and at some point that concern became big enough to where emergency services were now contacted. Here is some of her phone call to 911.
How may I help you?
Yeah, hi. I need a welfare check. I don't know if
On who are we doing a welfare check?
for my son. He's been missing for 2 days. His work's called, his family's called, I've called, his ex-wife's called, and there's nobody answering the phone, and there's nothing. Nobody can get a hold of him, and then his work called, and they can't get a hold of him, and it's really, he just doesn't act like this.
Okay. Does he live alone?
He lives with his 16-year-old daughter, who is not answering the phone.
Okay.
Or replying to a text.
Mm-hmm.
And the weird part is, I'll just tell you this, there's been ATM withdrawals at 3 different ATMs.
When responders arrived at the property, they were simply responding to a welfare concern, and there were no expectations as to what they were about to find. As firefighters moved through the house, their attention was drawn to the garbage where a fire was active. It wasn't a huge, uncontrollable blaze, but it was significant enough to require immediate action. Following standard procedure, their priority was to extinguish the fire before assessing anything else. Once the fire was brought under control, the situation changes instantly. Behind the area where the fire had been burning, they located a body. It was Daniel Houseth. This is no longer a welfare check. It is now a crime scene. As investigators began examining the house, a clearer picture starts to emerge. There is red DNA present in multiple areas. It wasn't just confined to a single room or location. The placements of these red stains and spatters, they suggest that some movement took place within the house after the initial incident occurred, i.e., Daniel was moved. There were also signs that certain areas had been interfered with. Cleaning products were present, and some of the surfaces appeared to have been wiped down, but it will later turn out not well enough. This kind of partial cleaning can be worse than just doing nothing at all. There may be a trail left behind of where the products used actually came from. And as this scene is processed further, the sequence of what probably happened starts to take shape. At the same time, the injuries identified on Daniel, they cannot be explained by a fire. Attempts had been made to dismantle him. After the events inside the house, the timeline really starts moving quickly, and it's kind of all over the place. Some new communications begin, with messages being sent to Daniel's mother. These messages, though, they present a version of events that do not align with what investigators already knew. These messages were presenting him as still being alive, saying that he was just resting, saying that there was nothing immediately wrong. So somebody was trying to control the narrative outside of the house. And to make this case even more concerning, with a terrible scene and Daniel obviously no longer with us, Sierra was also missing. At the same time, Daniel's car had been taken, financial transactions on his accounts were happening, money was being withdrawn, and in doing so a trackable path was left behind. This new trail starts in Las Vegas, but it continues out of state. Eventually the route leads to Salt Lake City in Utah. Whether the suspects thought they were remaining invisible, or whether they didn't know or care, those debit cards continued to be used. Locations were being given away online. CCTV captures the suspects clearly. And so, investigators closed in. In the days leading up to April the 9th, 2021, a whole bunch of stuff starts happening that takes this case on a new trajectory. Sierra Houseth and Aaron Guerrero are documented visiting multiple stores in the Las Vegas area. At these locations, they purchased some things that one by one don't sound so bad. But together well, what do you think about them? They bought things like bleach. They obtained gloves and face coverings. Separately, they bought liquid capable of accelerating fires. Now, what would you do with things like that? What also stands out is how these purchases were actually made. They were spread across multiple trips, different stores, different times. But CCTV footage places them at these specific locations, The transactions, of course, are digitally recorded, confirming their timings and whereabouts. And at different stages, responsibilities appear to be divided between the couple. One person completes certain transactions, the other goes and buys other stuff. This introduces coordination, it introduces planning, and it suggests an understanding that they both knew what was coming next. When I spoke earlier about the family life, it gets even more complicated, even darker than it originally sounded. Because long before April of 2021, there had already been years of conflict, allegations, court involvement, and competing accounts about what life inside the family had actually been like. There is, of course, the 2011 confrontation between Daniel and Elizabeth, in which Daniel later gives his own statement to police. In that statement, he admitted that he had planned the confrontation in advance because he suspected that Elizabeth had been having an affair and he simply wanted to scare her. He admitted to calling her into a room, pushing her backwards, repeatedly making aggressively intimate remarks, and pulling her pants down more than once. He did, however, deny touching her in an SA kind of way, and he claimed that he had stopped and said that he was joking. This is just one pressure cooker in that home, but there were more. Another possible reason sits inside the collapse of the marriage itself. The affidavit from Pastor Terry Jimerson adds another layer to the breakdown. According to that affidavit, Daniel said that he had wanted another woman, someone called Kylie, to move into the family home. He also later confessed that he wanted to leave Elizabeth and their children, and then to move to Oregon with Kylie. If that is indeed true, things seem to be getting worse and worse. Even a short text exchange from 2011 hints at Daniel himself acknowledging that he had caused the damage. So when you step back, this was really not a clean separation. It appears to have been a long-running nightmare, and then, years later, that fracture was reopened. It was widened through Sierra. A 2020 email shows Daniel pushing to spend time with Sierra separately, whilst Elizabeth was pushing back, insisting that the existing custody arrangement should be followed. By August of 2020, a court order stated that Elizabeth had primary physical custody, and that Daniel was violating the order by refusing to return Sierra. So Sierra had become the centre of a renewed legal struggle. This was no longer just a story about two ex-spouses who disliked each other. It had become a story about where Sierra lived, who had influence over her, and who she was meant to believe. But there are even more layers to this, because once Sierra's own letter is added in, the picture becomes even darker. In that handwritten letter to the court, Sierra describes Daniel as a source of trauma, and she makes a long list of allegations. She claims that he was controlling and isolating. She claims physical maltreatment. She claims SA and other inappropriate behaviour. These included touching, lewd comments, coercion, exposure to adult material, and taking photographs or videos against her will. She claims that he normalised underage drinking, that he psychologically manipulated her, that he verbally attacked her, brought unsafe people into the home, and created an unstable environment. She even claims that he allowed or encouraged other individuals to behave sexually towards her. If Sierra believed or experienced these things, then that gives one possible explanation for how she may have come to see Daniel not as a parent protecting her, but as someone standing in the way of a better life, of freedom, or her control over her own life as she was starting to enter adulthood. But this is where the case becomes even more complex once again, because there are also statements from Sierra's siblings. Sierra's sister Dana, she made a police statement that says Daniel offered her alcohol, and that she later believed that Sierra drank with him as well. Sierra's brother Jordan's statement says that he was pressured to drink alcohol, and he suspected that the same may have happened to his sisters. Those statements support at least one of Sierra's broader claims, specifically the normalization of alcohol around the children. It is important to say that none of these statements can actually be treated as fact. They are all alleged or opinions made by the people involved in this case. At the same time, there's another possible reason as to why things went south, and that is Aaron Guerrero. By 2020 and into 2021, Sierra's relationship with Aaron was now full-blown. Both sets of parents had reportedly agreed that the two of them should stop seeing each other, and so those plans to run away had been discussed. To them, Daniel could have simply been an obstacle. The chase for the suspects came to an end when, in Utah, Daniel's vehicle was identified. Law enforcement conduct a stop. The individuals inside are detained, and they are, of course, Sierra and Aaron. And from that point, the investigation really accelerates. Regardless of all the other evidence in this case, one video was uncovered, and it's truly unbelievable. I think the best thing I can do is just show you the video in its entirety.
I don't know what to say. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. After murdering day 3 after murdering somebody.
Whoa! Don't put that on the camera.
It was worth it.
And we had a lot today.
It was worth it. I got plenty of sex. I was payment for doing it.
And no this time. We got through that. We overcame.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All of the evidence from multiple sources is brought together, and ultimately both of them enter guilty pleas. This removes a need for a full trial process. The admissions establish responsibility within the framework of the law. Sentencing follows. Both receive life sentences. They have the possibility of parole after 22 years.
The judge sentencing the teens to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 22 years served. Those were terms specified in an agreement when the teens pleaded guilty to murder and other charges.
Where did the evil come that was bred into a soul that murders their own father?
Christine Halseth delivering an emotional statement about the murder of her son, Daniel.
You're in a tough spot because your son is the victim and the killer is your granddaughter. Can you talk about that?
Well, she's not my granddaughter.
Sierra Halseth claiming her father abused her.
He locks me in place and starts pushing me and hitting me around.
Aaron Guerrero offering an apology.
I ask for forgiveness as I get sentenced today, and I hope we're going to feel a little peace.
The Halseth family insisting Sierra's claims of abuse are false. Some saying they believe the death penalty would be a more appropriate sentence.
But they both should have gotten death with the life they took. 20 years will never be enough for taking down one.
Daniel Halseth's loved ones pointing out how Aaron Guerrero appeared to show remorse and emotion, while they believe Sierra did not.
Maybe we're in trouble. I've got no answers. How to make it better, to get closer to you. Maybe find something new that will arise one more time between us.
Doesn't like her at all. I'm really scared. I really am. She's a good girl. She's just, she doesn't know how to survive out there by herself.
Again and again, love is a losing game. With or without you, it feels so lonely.
Human remains consistent with those of Kylie Montero have been recovered.
Before the events of this case really begin, there is Kylie's life as it was. She'd experienced a significant loss at a young age. She lost her father to substances when she was just 2 years old, and her mother then passed away when she was just 13. To make things even harder, Kylie described the fact that she was present with her mother at the time that she passed, saying she was holding her hand. These experiences tend to shape how someone grows up. Losing both parents in childhood is devastating to a level that thankfully most people will never experience. Kylie, though, she didn't just lay down and give up. She kept on pushing forwards as best as she could. However, it doesn't seem like she just had an easy ride after losing her mother. One TikTok post that she made really choked me up. She said that she was bullied and had her phone smashed purely because her mother passed away. If that doesn't make you angry, I really don't know what will. After the passing of her mother, I believe that Kylie then mainly lived with her auntie and uncle. But it seems like the people that she really idolized were her grandparents. She made a lot of positive posts about them. By the age of 18, she decided that she wanted to be a welder, and from what I've seen online, it seems like welding is actually a great career choice. Kylie graduated from Attleboro High School, and she was now entering a new stage of her life. However, sadly, that transition was just not going to be smooth. Kylie, as most teenagers, was active on social media. Her TikTok account has over 1,000 posts on there. I actually looked at the first 1,000 posts, and it really seems like she was a great, fun person. She also had Instagram and Facebook and an old YouTube account, and maybe some others too. It says that she had Snapchat on her Instagram profile. From her social media posting, I can tell you that she worked at Wendy's for a period of time, and that she had at least one boyfriend before the events of this video, and also that it seems like she really loved music of just all genres. People that knew her described her as expressive, as social, and as always talking to and staying in touch with the people that she loved. She had close friendships. She liked to use nicknames for people, and she maintained connections both online and offline with those friends. And somebody new was about to enter Kylie's life. Kylie would meet with someone that changed her life totally. From what I can decipher from her TikTok account, she met Gregory Groom, or Greg, in early 2025 at a park in Attleboro, and from what she said, this was in the middle of the night. She wasn't alone at the time. Her friend Anna was also there when they first met. It seems like Greg, somehow for whatever reason, approached Kylie and gave her some flowers. So that makes me think that this encounter wasn't completely random, and maybe they had been talking online, but maybe not. Either way, it seems quite unorthodox, and I personally would not recommend going to parks at night and meeting people. From there, the relationship between Kylie and Greg developed quickly. They began seeing each other often, and within just a short period of time, it seems like the relationship had become really serious. Publicly, Kylie spoke positively about Greg. In her posts and interactions, she described him as someone who treated her well and made her feel valued and loved. And from the outside, the relationship just appeared great, kind of like love's young dream. Kylie actually made a whole bunch of posts about Greg, saying that he was perfect and how they loved each other deeply. She also posted quite a lot about going to prom, an event that she attended with friend Anna as her date. But she also made sure to make posts with Greg too, as she was all dressed up for the night. At the prom, she was awarded prom court. I'm British, obviously, so I had to Google what this was. And I believe it's just an award from her peers to honour her, which is awesome. Well done, Kylie. I believe that Greg couldn't be her date at the prom because he was too old. At that time, he was 22, and she was 18. One huge and unexpected turning point in this case was that Kylie had recently shared that she was pregnant. On July the 18th, 2025, she announced that her and Greg were expecting baby Groom, or Peanuts as she was calling the baby. And now at just 18 years old, she was preparing for a brand new chapter and adding further context to her life in the lead up to August. However, as good as things looked on social media, as is so often the case, real life wasn't that rosy. Kylie was not in a stable living situation. She moved between places, at times staying in a shelter, and at other times attempting to stay with Greg. And I will add a couple of things here from what I can deduce from what I can find online. It wasn't actually Greg's house that she was moving into, but instead it was like a shed, an outbuilding, which I believe is actually this red shed from the prom pictures. And this shed was situated on Greg's grandparents' land. And that shelter that I mentioned, the place that Kylie sometimes stayed at, this is called Bethesda House. It's a Massachusetts-based shelter providing temporary housing, as well as structured support for young mothers who are pregnant or parenting. I can't fully work out why she was in a shelter and not at home, but I guess families and people's beliefs can be complex, so really, who knows? The living arrangement that she had with Greg's shed also seemed inconsistent, and this wasn't a proper home or a proper house, nor was it somewhere that Kylie was able to live at long term. And this really creates a weird dynamic between a couple, where one person has more control over the environment, and the other person is just trying to maintain access to it. There are also some TikTok posts that suggest there was maybe some other imbalances in this relationship. At one point, Kylie states that Greg didn't want her to go somewhere, suggesting that maybe her movements were being influenced by his preferences and not her own free will. Friends and family would also later describe arguments within a relationship, as well as some other periods of tension that were not visible in her online posts. There is one good insight into Kylie's living arrangements from her birthday post for Greg, something that she shared on Instagram, which says, "Happy birthday to the love of my life, not just my mystery man, which yes, I called you for weeks, because I wanted you all to myself. You're my person and you complete me. You're literally my other half, and I have no clue what I'd do without you. You gave me a home when no one else could, and even gave my cat one, and how rude because he loves you more than he loves me now. I love when you treat my friends with the best respect, especially Anna. It makes my world when you'll get along, and seeing you guys become best friends. I could go on for days about how good you are, but I won't. I love you, baby. Happy birthday." Also mentioned in that birthday post is the friend, Anna, someone that Kylie had known since August of 2021. She was of course present when Kylie first met Greg in the park that night, and Kylie spoke highly of her online. She described her as a close friend or a best friend, sometimes as just my Anna. It seems like Kylie and Greg and Anna hung out a lot, like they often came as a three. The relationship between Greg and Kylie did seem like a bit of a whirlwind, and relationships, particularly those that form quickly, that don't just exist in isolation or a vacuum, they often go hand in hand with turmoil or any other number of issues. They can also be influenced by the people around them, and over a short period of time, the dynamics can really shift. On August the 6th, Kylie left Bethesda House, the shelter that she'd been staying at that time, for only a few weeks. This happened after returning from a hospital visit early in the morning, due to a pregnancy-related scare, following which she fell asleep and missed a meeting. According to documentation shared by Kylie's sister, this missed meeting resulted in her discharge from the shelter.
Went to the hospital. She got back to the house at 6 in the morning. She had fallen asleep and they had come in to wake her up around 9 to tell her that she had to leave. And when she had talked to them and she tried to beg them, she was like, "I really want to do this program. I'm sorry I fell asleep. I'm so sorry." She was so upset over it.
Faith says Kylie was discharged for missing a mandatory meeting.
And then, from what I can gather, Kylie then got a rideshare or some kind of volunteer ride by the shelter, which took her to Greg's home on County Street in Rehoboth. This sounds like a really tough time for Kylie, and then things would go from bad to worse. Once she was with Greg, an argument began between them. It's believed that this argument centered around whether she would actually be allowed to stay at the property. This question had come up before, but on this occasion, it seems like the situation escalated. Kylie then sent a message to her sister, describing what she says had happened. She also stated in that message that her phone battery was low at just 4%, also writing quite a horrifying line, "If I die, it was Greg." Hyperbole is a thing though, and it's always worth bearing that in mind. But no matter how you take it, this is where the timeline begins to split into different directions. By August the 7th, the next day, Kylie is still on Greg's grandparents' property. Earlier that day, she sent a message stating that she is still there, waiting while Greg went out to get food. Later messages then show uncertainty about whether she would be staying at Greg's any longer, which was then followed by a complete loss of contact. By the next day, friends were sending messages asking her to call them, and they were attempting both audio and video calls, none of which were answered. These messages place her inside the property, and they show that, at least at that point, she had not left. After that though, there were no confirmed communications with Kylie. Later, Greg provides his account of what happened next. He tells investigators that Kylie left the property on foot, and that she was walking toward Reservoir Avenue at around 7 p.m. Kylie's last text message was sent at 3:52 p.m, and the first message that she didn't respond to was at 7:09 p.m. From that point forward, her phone becomes completely inactive. There are no messages, no calls, and no activity on social media. For someone who had been consistently communicating with friends and maintaining an active online presence, that sudden and complete silence is really unusual. It just does not align with her established behaviours. So now, on one side, there is the claim that she left the property voluntarily, but on the other side, there's a confirmed fact that she was still there earlier in the day, but then just stopped communicating entirely. So there is a gap there, and that becomes the focus of the investigation. Because if there is no actual evidence that she did leave the property, then the possibility that she remained there has to be considered. On that same day, August the 8th, Kylie is reported missing by concerned boyfriend Greg. Police begin a missing person investigation, and they attend Greg's grandparents' property as part of their initial inquiries. Search efforts are organised quickly. Canine units are brought in, drones are used to scan the surrounding area, and nearby woods and bodies of water are checked.
Right now, search and rescue teams are looking from the air and on the ground for a missing 18-year-old woman. Police say Kylie Montero was last seen or heard from almost a week ago. Her sister is worried.
That's the last contact that she's made with anyone was Thursday through text message. The last known time where we heard her voice was Wednesday night.
Kylie's sister says she's just 11 weeks pregnant. Her friend says she's living with her boyfriend.
Me and her had spoken Wednesday evening, and she was just talking about how she was in a little argument with her boyfriend. She was like, I don't feel safe right now, like something's not right. And then I had tried talking to her after that, and she just stopped responding to me after that.
Officers, sheriff's deputies, and troopers spending much of today and the week scouring the woods next to a reservoir in town near County Street where she was last seen. Neighbors hoping she's just run away.
She's disappeared Lord knows where. You'd hope that maybe she's gone someplace or has some people who could help her out, but she's just laying low and being quiet because she's either too upset or afraid.
Kylie was described as wearing a red Get Over It t-shirt, ripped jeans and tan boots at the time that she was last seen. These details are used to guide the search. Despite these massive efforts though, nothing is found. There are absolutely no confirmed sightings, no physical evidence in the surrounding area, and no indication of where she may have gone. Friends and family then begin speaking publicly, emphasizing that this behavior is completely out of character. When a person's actions suddenly deviate from their normal behavior without any explanation, it suggests that it's very possible it wasn't done out of choice. Search efforts then continue over the following days. They extend into a broader area, but they still produce no results. With no evidence of her leaving the area and no communications from her, attention begins to return to the last confirmed location, Greg's grandparents' property on County Street, as well as the person who reported being the last to see her and who called Kylie in as missing to 911. As the search moves on, investigators return to Greg. At this stage, his role in the timeline is clearly defined. He is the last known person to have seen Kylie, and the last confirmed location of her presence was his grandparents' property where he lived. So after Kylie had been officially missing for 3 days, on August the 11th, Greg is interviewed by police. During that interview, he maintains his original account. He states that Kylie left the property on foot and that she walked towards Reservoir Avenue. He says that he does not know where she went after that. And yes, he acknowledged that there had been arguments between them, but he denied that anything physical had taken place. Over time, though, that begins to change. He later admitted that there had been some level of physical contact that had occurred during previous arguments, and these included grabbing Kylie's arms. Some TikTok users theorise that this bruise on Kylie's shoulder is from one such event, but of course that's not confirmed. Investigators begin to examine Greg's account more closely, looking for any inconsistencies across his multiple interviews. And as this process continues, those inconsistencies do begin to appear. Descriptions become less precise, certain details are adjusted, and parts of the timeline are no longer clear.
Patrice, 18-year-old Kylie Montero is one of several siblings. Tonight, 2 of her sisters telling me that her disappearance is completely out of character and that they fear for her safety.
This is not normal behavior. We have no clue what happened.
It's been 8 days since anyone has seen or heard from 18-year-old Kylie Montero, who was last seen on August 7th near County Street in Rehoboth.
The last time we heard her voice was Wednesday night, but last point of contact was Thursday through text.
Her sister's telling NBC 10 that she wandered away Thursday night from her estranged boyfriend's house that borders the reservoir, the same area law enforcement have been searching for days.
He woke up Friday morning and realized that she wasn't there. He got worried and contacted the police.
Around this same period, another element of the timeline begins to surface, that being Kylie's best friend, Anna. Her name appears within statements, including references made by Greg to investigating officers. At this stage, there is no allegation made against her by investigators, and no charge relating to her involvement in any offence. However, her presence becomes part of the broader timeline that is being examined. There are also other accounts being shared publicly during this time, but they aren't official findings, nor have they been verified by law enforcement. However, they are being circulated by individuals who state they were close to the situation, that they either knew Kylie or knew her by proxy. In those accounts, they claim that Anna was present at the property on August the 6th, and that she remained there in the days that followed. This will become important later, and once again, these claims are not confirmed by investigators, and no allegations of wrongdoing have been made against her. But they do introduce an additional layer to the timeline, because they suggest that the environment at the property may have involved more than two people, namely Kylie and Greg, and that Anna could have been there as well.
I wanted to come on here and say something about the situation about Kylie and her friend Anna. Because a lot of people are talking about Anna, and I wanted to say something because a lot of people are, and I didn't say anything. Because John DePetro posted a video about it, but I don't like him, and I don't like his platform, and he wasn't putting it out there for the right reasons. But I'm gonna watch what I say, because I'm gonna watch what I say. August 6th, the day that Kylie went to Greg's house to get her stuff, or whatever she was gonna do, I'm not exactly sure what she was gonna do that night, Anna was there. And I'm gonna put that out there, that Anna was there that day that Kylie went there to go get her stuff, August 6th. In that same day that Kylie was reported missing, Anna was at his house that night too. And the night after that, and the night after that, her location was saying that she was there. And that's weird. It's why are you at your best friend's boyfriend's house when she's missing? I don't know, it's just weird. And a lot of people are oh, there's conspiracies. No, that's the truth, is what I just said. And I'm not making any accusations or anything, but I am. But anyway, I just wanted to come on here and kind of give my perspective, my view on that. But yeah, thank you for watching my video.
That really shifts how I see the dynamics of the situation in my head. So when this is considered alongside Greg's statement, it creates a far more complex picture. It raises questions about who was present, what was seen or heard, and whether the whole truth has actually been accounted for. It defines an area in this case where information is just incomplete.
I'm scared. I'm really scared. I don't know if they have her, but some part of me feels like they do.
As police search the wooded area of 107 County Street in Rehoboth, Kylie Montero's sister, Faith, is holding on to hope but also fearing the worst. Her sister, 18-year-old Kylie, went missing on August 7th. Now the Bristol County DA's office just announced the arrest of 22-year-old Gregory Groom of Rehoboth. He's been charged with aggravated assault and battery on a pregnant person and domestic assault and battery with an intimidation of a witness for acts committed against Kylie. Faith says her sister was last seen here in the area of her boyfriend's house, where the two did have an altercation.
There was an altercation that happened the night before she went missing, but that's the only thing. We went out looking for her again the other day, and we've been in contact ever since.
On August the 14th, a large-scale search of Greg's grandparents' property is carried out. The land spans approximately 25 acres, and despite a thorough search, nothing is found. So at this stage, it does seem like Kylie truly did walk away like Greg said. But then days later, Greg is brought in for yet another interview, and this time his account changes once again. It would be during this interview that Greg provides a different version of events, a far, far darker picture. He describes another altercation with Kylie. He states that he pushed her and that she fell, hitting her head. He says that what happened was not intentional. However, when this explanation is just one more story, just introducing more inconsistencies, the truth is hard to decipher. Investigators continue to question him, applying pressure as they prepare to carry out an even more extensive search of his grandparents' property. He's informed that a search warrant has been obtained and that the area will be examined in detail. And it's at this point that his account changes even further. He provides additional information and draws a map. On that map, he identifies a specific location behind a shed on the property. He then describes what he says took place on August the 6th. He says that they had a fight, and in that fight, he used a sharp kitchen implement, and that Kylie's time on this earth ended at that location. He explains that he then spent several hours digging a hole, and this was approximately 20 yards from the shed. He then describes placing Kylie there before covering the area with debris to conceal it. Investigators then return to the property and search the precise location that was identified, and it would be there that they find disturbed earth, and it's consistent with recent digging. In a shocking moment, a body is then recovered approximately 5 feet below the surface.
Human remains consistent with those of Kylie Montero have been recovered. This is not a simple matter to look into. I mean, the first step is he reports her missing. So that may arouse some reaction from investigators, and from there, various evidence is followed up. As you heard inside, he spoke to the police several times, including yesterday, at which point he was being charged with a domestic assault that occurred on or about August 6th, as you heard the prosecutor say, reported by her sister, the victim's recitation of what occurred. And then yesterday, in which he was charged with a domestic incident, and the charges were upgraded to murder after the body was located.
On August the 19th, Greg is formally arrested. He is charged in connection with Kylie's passing, and he is held without bail. In court, he enters a plea of not guilty.
A body consistent with Kylie Montero was discovered approximately 5 feet underground. Ms. Montero's remains were recovered last evening, and her body is at the office of the chief medical examiner undergoing identification process and undergoing an autopsy. Based on this case, the defendant's confession and the prior domestic, the Commonwealth asks this court to hold the defendant without bail.
No argument. Going to be held without bail.
But now, even with that sequence of events now being established through evidence and statements, some earlier questions about the timeline do not just entirely disappear. Greg, according to the police paperwork, was £135. And I mean absolutely no disrespect at all when I make this statement. I say it purely from a curious and factual standpoint. But Kylie did outweigh Greg. And I do, just in my own opinion, have to question whether Greg would have been capable of moving the body 20 yards alone. Like I say, no disrespect at all is meant.
How did she portray her relationship to you guys?
She, like every new relationship, I mean, she really cared for this guy, and even though they hadn't known each other very long, she was very adamant that this was, the love of her life, and this was the guy she wanted to be with. And she was always so happy, and she was always around him. So when she started kind of isolating or not talking to us as much, it didn't seem weird, because that's what I would do if I was in a new relationship, and just head over heels for someone. And
to us, it was her new favorite person, so it didn't seem out of the ordinary that she wanted to spend so much time with him. She still kept in contact. We always were in communication with her. She never fell off the face of the earth. She was always around, so it didn't seem out of the ordinary for us. It wasn't concerning at all. The only thing that worried us was that their relationship was moving very fast.
Yeah.
But that happens from time to time in a lot of relationships.
About 2 weeks ago on August 4th, I actually had the privilege of meeting and speaking with Kylie Montero because she was my brother's best friend and they would always FaceTime. I'm talking like every time that I would ask my brother, who are you on FaceTime with? 9 times out of 10, he was saying Kylie. Now, my conversation with Kylie was not very long and it also wasn't like a meeting conversation. She was actually talking to my brother about her stay in the shelter. August 4th would be the very first and last time that I ever spoke with that girl. It wasn't until a couple days later that my brother had informed me that she went missing while I was actually in the kitchen cooking food. He had told me, he was like, you remember that girl you were talking with over the phone? Just like, yeah, what about her? That's when he was like, oh, she's missing. And I was like, what do you mean she's missing? My first thought went to the shelter. I was like, did the shelter do something to her? But my brother actually informed me that she had been kicked out of the shelter and was looking for a place to stay. And the last person that she was with was actually her boyfriend, Greg. Which, by the way, I did know that Kylie Montero was in a domestic violent relationship with this man because my brother had told me when he told me that she went missing that this man would get physical with her. To which, at that point, I was just like low-key a bit nervous. And I was just like, I really hope that she's okay. Because my brother also did inform me that she is not the type of person to just never text back or to never say something, and that she's always on her phone no matter what, and that if she doesn't text you, you will see her reposting something on TikTok or posting something somewhere. At this point, she had already been missing, and my brother was telling me that she had gone to Greg's house because Greg told her that she would be able to stay in his shed as long as, I don't know if it's his parents or his grandparents or whoever lived with him, didn't know, because apparently she had previously lived with him and they had kicked her out because they did not believe that the baby she was pregnant with was his. That being what my brother told me already gave me a bad feeling, because the fact that the last spot that she was at and the last person she was seen with was at Greg at his house already just doesn't sound right, knowing the violent person that he is. Mind you, I have nothing but good things to say about this girl, because not only was my brother friends with her and she seemed to care about my brother's feelings, and if my brother felt a certain way or if my brother was upset, she would ride for my brother through thick and thin.
In the days following the arrest, the community responds. Vigils are held and people gather to remember her. Friends and family speak publicly, describing Kylie as caring, expressive and funny. Her sister recalls their final conversation, stating that the last thing that Kylie said to her was, "I love you so much."
Those who knew Kylie best said that she could light up a room just as bright as any candle.
The first time I met her was freshman year at volleyball tryouts, and I just remember her going up to everyone saying like, "Hi, my name's Kylie," and she was so excited to be there, and that stuck with me all throughout high school. She was always the one smiling, saying hi to everyone, being kind.
Many at the vigil wearing purple, the color of domestic violence awareness. A lot of attendees saying they didn't know Kylie, but wanted to make sure that they showed their support after hearing about her case.
Support in any capacity is going to be great for this family, especially in this time of grieving and loss.
Friends in attendance said that they would never forget Kylie's kindness.
She bought me this shirt on my birthday in sophomore year, and because I love South Park, so she bought me it. She got me a plushie, a bunch of other stuff. She was always just making jokes, laughing. She was always nice to people, always buying things. She never liked receiving gifts.
And that seeing so many people turn out to support their friend meant a lot to them.
It's so great that she made an impact on so many people. You can see that there's so many people here who love and support her, and I hope she knows that, because we all love and care about her, even people who, the teachers came from our school, people who don't even know her are here, and that just means that she had a great impact on everyone with her kindness and just the way she carries herself.
After the speaking portion of the vigil ended, attendees went up to a poster board provided by the Montero family to leave messages of love for Kylie and of support for her family.
The investigation continues, and Greg is expected to return to court in September of 2026. This case is far from over. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.